Hi, Michael Bettine here once again, and today I will be talking about bowls of all types and sizes right here on It's Cup of Time. All right, today I want to look at more of my instrument collection, and we'll be looking at various types of bowls. Now, as an instrument, a bowl is actually considered what they call a resting bell, because it is basically a bell, except it's flipped the other way around, and it rests on a table or some sort of a platform. So they're often called resting bells, or even I've heard the term resting gong, because in Asia, oftentimes they are called gongs, even though they're actually bowls. So the term resting bowl or resting gong can be used. Now, I like bowls for the percussive sound that they get, and I almost exclusively play them with mallets. It's rare that I will play a singing bowl with a wand going around the rim. Although I do that on occasion, I often do that more for myself here at home than I do when I'm performing or presenting a session. When I want a singing bowl sound, as I explained in the previous video, I will use a drobu or ganta bell and play the wand around the edge of this. I really like the sound of the bell. I prefer it to the singing bowl. I also like the fact that I can carry it around and it's very stable as I carry it and move it. So I generally prefer to use a bell instead of a singing bowl. But as I said, I like to play the bowls with mallets. But first, let's just look at a couple other things. One is, when we see most bowls, they're usually on a cushion, a small pillow like this, appropriate to the size of the bowl. Or sometimes we will even see them on a stand with a cushion, and then there is the bowl. Here's two different examples of that. And these are actually Japanese Rind bowls. And these small sizes you will find in a personal shrine at somebody's home, often in what they call a butsudan, which is a shrine-shaped box that opens up, and you will have possibly photos of your ancestors or some sort of family relics. You may also have a Buddha statue and incense, candles, and such, and a small Rind bowl that you will play with a little leather padded mallet, and you will play for prayers and meditation. So as we see most bowls, and when you buy a singing bowl, you usually get some sort of pillow or cushion with it. And those are fine, except when you're using a lot of bowls on the floor or on a table. Like I generally use about, I believe, 13 or 14 bowls in my setup, and have 13 or 14 cushions is kind of not too practical to carry around and to use. And then also you get the bowls at different levels, and the bowls can move around. And if you've got big pillow cushions, they take up a lot of space. So trying to get bowls close to each other is not very practical. So what I like to do, it's hard to see on the table here, but I have some of this rubberized shelf material that you would put in your kitchen shelves to put dishes or pots and pans and things on. I like it because it allows the bowls to vibrate freely. It's also a bit tacky, so the bowls will stick and they don't move around. They cannot slide. Here on the carpet here, I can slide it. Here on this, they stick. So I really like using this shelf material. You can buy it at most hardware stores or a store like Target. And a roll, I believe this is 18 inches wide. And it was 18 inches by, I believe, 8 feet long. And it cost me under $10. And it works perfectly for what I want to do. Keeps all my bowls and other instruments stable. And also, if I'm setting things down, it's very quiet. So I like to use it on various mallet trays and instrument tables because of that. So as I said, here's this very small one. This is about 2¼ inches, 2½ inches with an appropriate sized mallet. And this is a Rind bowl, sometimes also known as an O-Rin bowl. R-I-N for Rin, O-R-I-N, O-Rin. And these are Japanese in origin. They come from small sizes like this up to, I've seen 20-inch diameter bowls, massive bowls that weigh like 40 or 50 pounds. And you will see them in Buddhist temples. And they use a much, much larger striker like this, often held with 2 hands, and goong, right on the edge to get that really big focus sound that they will use to open services with or play at certain times to bring people's attention to prayers and meditation. So those are Rind bowls. I do have a few singing bowls here. I have a couple here and one here, but the rest are Rind bowls. Here's a couple other singing bowls. I like the sound of the Rind because it's very focused. It doesn't have a lot of overtones, where a singing bowl will have the note of the bowl, but many overtones that sort of blend in and sometimes actually sort of overshadow the tone of the bowl, whereas the Rind stays very focused. But first, let's just look at different bowls here and different types and sort of explain. One thing as a percussionist, I'm always looking for instruments I can play, different things that just, make a sound that's usable. So here we have, this is actually an aluminum bowl that is copper clad, made in India. And it's a really nice sound. This is a fruit bowl or a decorative bowl. It's thin-walled, and it's aluminum, so it doesn't get a big, powerful sound. It's sort of a dark, thin sound that has a short sustain, but it's a very usable type of sound. I remember my wife brought this home from the store, and I hit it with my finger and I went, So I got a mallet and I claimed it. So thin bowls will tend to have a lower pitch, which is very natural, just like cymbals and gongs, other instruments. Thinner will generally equate to lower. So here's a very thin singing bowl. Has a low pitch, it has a lot of overtones, and it doesn't have the power that you will find from a thicker one, but it has that darker tone. And as a general rule, thin bowls will have a thin sound. Here's another thinner one. Has a very nice sound, but it's not strong, powerful sound. So here's a bowl of, let's look at this one. Here's a singing bowl, sort of in between these two. And if you can see, there is a definite difference in thickness. This one is much thicker. More focused tone, much longer lasting, and it can be much louder if struck with a little more force. And you can hear that the note of the bowl comes through much more. The overtones aren't as prominent when struck. Any of these can be played with a wand and they will sound fine. But that's just the thing when you're shopping for bowls, especially if you are shopping online. An important thing to pay attention to, if they don't have a sound file or a video available, is how thick is the bowl. And if you see something with a very, very thin wall like this, then you know it's going to have a thin sound. So these are important things to know. I buy a lot of bowls online, and often they're bowls that I don't get to hear, but I can tell what they're going to sound like to a certain degree because of the experience I have. I have a chart that I've made where I have all the bowls, these and all the rest of the bowls I have them listed, and I have their diameters, I have their weight in grams, and I have the note or the pitch, the general pitch of each bowl listed. And I can tell by looking at a bowl and looking at if they have the weight and the diameter listed, I can often tell where the note of the bowl is going to fall. So this is about a 3-inch bowl here. Let's just say, for example, this weighed 300 grams. If I was looking at another very similar bowl that had the same type of thickness, that wasn't a thin bowl, and it said it was 270 grams, a lighter bowl, then it would probably have a lower pitch. If it said it was 320 grams, a bit heavier bowl, it would probably have a higher pitch. So again, I can get a relative idea of where the note's going to fall and be reasonably assured, as I buy something. But with a lot of bowls, I tend to buy lots of bowls, as in a group of bowls. Often dealers will put up 3 bowls, 5 bowls, 10 bowls, all in a lot. And if they have the sizes and the weights, or even if they just have the sizes and good pictures so I can determine if they're thick or thin and things like that, I might buy the lot, get a really good deal on them, knowing that I could probably use 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, depending on how many I get, and either add them to the setup here because they'll work out, use them in a different setup, or some of the bowls I can resell that I don't need. So that's what I tend to do. If they have sound files, all the better. Then I can really know what I'm getting into. So buying bowls, as I always say with anything, the best is if you can play them and hear them. It's not always possible. So I've done my research and my homework and put together sort of a system where I can evaluate bowls online and decide whether I want to add it to my collection or not. So let's get rid of a couple of these here. And we will look at some other aspects. Some room here. All right. So as I said, many of these are Japanese Rind bowls. And I like them for their very focused tone. And that's because I tend to play my bowls with mallets. I like to use them as a percussive sound to add to the bells I use, the sound plates I use, and the gongs I use. So in picking all these bowls out, I'll have different sets with different tunings, just as I do in all of my instruments. And that's explained in some earlier videos. The video about bells and bell plates, and some of the gong videos, and talking about a video on my methods of how I do this. So I look at everything as different sections. Just as in an orchestra, you will have violins and violas and cellos, string section, and a brass section with trumpets and trombones, woodwind section with oboes and clarinets, and that I look at all my instruments as different sections of this whole creation of my sort of gong orchestra. But first, let's just take another look at one other aspect. Here I have two very similar Rind bowls, but there's a distinct difference. This one is much lighter and thinner, and what I would call a tourist bowl. Not a very high quality one. Nice for decoration. The sound is okay. Here's one that's slightly smaller, but probably weighs twice as much. It's very thick and heavy, more of, for lack of a better term, a professional bowl versus a tourist bowl. And let's just compare the sound. So here's the tourist bowl. I mean, it has a decent sound, some sustain, some overtones. But now let's look at the other one, what I would call more or less a professional bowl. More focused pitch, less overtones, much more sustain. And arguably a better tone. This one's a bit dissonant. This one has a very musical, pleasant tone. So another aspect to look at when buying instruments, just like buying gongs, is be aware of a tourist bowl versus more of an actual musical instrument or professional quality bowl. And this one's fine. I use it in a lot of my improv work and other things. It fits in there. I don't use it in this setup because it doesn't really match what I'm doing, but it does work for a lot of the musics I play other than a gong meditation session. So this is my working set of bowls here. And it's basically two tune sets. I have the larger bowls, 3 of them, and the smaller bowls, there's 10 of them. But before we get into really playing those and describing how I use them, let's just look at some of the bowls themselves, because there's some differences you should know about. So this is a singing bowl here. You can get a better look at it in the light. And you can see it has etching on it. And if we can get a good picture inside, it's always kind of hard to see. There is a Buddha inside there, etched in. And that's, you know, that's nice. It looks really good. It makes it look kind of more fancy, or whatever you want to call it. This is very popular today in gongs and bowls to have this sort of etching on them. And really, it's just decorative. I don't think the etching really does anything to the sound. And it doesn't make your bowl any more special, other than it looks nice. So that's another thing to be aware of when you're buying bowls, is it looks great. You can have all these beautiful auspicious symbols and Buddhas and the Buddha's eyes and all this stuff on there. That's great. But as always, what does the bowl sound like? So I bought this bowl because I like the sound. Has a nice note, it's long lasting, and it fits in with what I was doing. And it sounds fine with a wand too. So that's the thing to watch for. This is just something that's really big today, is suddenly we're getting all these etched instruments, and what do they sound like? That's all that matters to me. Whether it has etching or not, if it sounds good, if I can use the sound, then I'll buy it. But it's a thing to watch for. Another important thing is, well, let's just talk about bowls and the general mythology around them. I'm not the world's biggest bowl expert, especially because of the way I use bowls in a completely different manner than most people will use them, playing with the wands and doing a lot of work that way. So I'm not the biggest expert. I would always recommend to anybody interested in singing bowls to go out and buy Frank Perry's wonderful book, Himalayan Sound Revelations. It is so packed with practical and realistic information on the bowls. I cannot recommend that book enough. There's two really important aspects you need to know about bowls, especially singing bowls. We often see them called Tibetan singing bowls or Tibetan bowls. Most likely, any bowl you'll get a hold of is not made in Tibet. It's probably made in Nepal, possibly even India, maybe Pakistan, because that's where the metal workers are. Metalworking is just of this type is generally not done in Tibet. But Tibet is the big buzzword because it's sort of the spiritual capital of things. You know, you think of Tibetan Buddhism and all this, and it's, you know, there's all this mystery around Tibet because it's such an inaccessible country in the Himalayan mountains and all. So if you go to stores or you go to online shops, they'll often say Tibetan bowls. Take that with a grain of salt, as they say, because it's most definitely not from Tibet. And another aspect is ancient bowls. And people will talk about, well, this bowl is hundreds of years old and ancient and things like that. I highly doubt it in most cases. It's I don't know where these people get their provenance on how old a bowl is. There are old bowls out there, but there are not that many, really. If you would go back through history, let's say we go back 300 years ago, what was the population of Tibet? Supposedly the bowl is made in Tibet. What was the population back then? How many metal workers were there making bowls? How many bowls were made? How many bowls survived over these hundreds of years to be for sale today? Even if people were making a lot of bowls, there was not a massive industry in making them. So the surviving bowls would be few and far between. So old singing bowls are out there, but there's not that many of them really out there. And again, what is the provenance? How can some dealer prove to you that this bowl is 100 years old, 200 years old, 400 years old, that it's from Atlantis or Mu or some other lost continent? I mean, you see all this out there. Buyer beware. And even trusted sort of dealers, long time dealers will have stuff. And, ancient. It's important to know that you can't go by patina. I had talked about that in a previous video. Like, this bowl has a nice patina. But the patina alone cannot guarantee how old it is, because there are ways to fake a patina and to take brand new bowls made last week and make them look like this. So it's important when you're buying bowls to be aware of that, so that you're not spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on a supposed ancient bowl made in Tibet that most likely isn't. And I will defer to my good friend Mitch Nur or to Frank Perry, again, who are much more experts in the field of singing bowls and that whole thing. And you can read Frank's book, and you can also connect with Mitch's classes through 9 Ways Academia and learn much more about bowls than I could ever tell you. But these are just some general things. And finally, the final thing is the metal itself. We see a lot of stories and a lot of advertising about 7 metal bowls, 10 metal bowls. I've even seen, 12 or 15 metal bowls, supposedly. And my favorite one is it actually has meteorite in it, So it's like, no, just no. These bowls are basically made of what is known as bell bronze, which is an alloy of 80% copper and 20% tin. It's a very sonorous alloy that has been used for hundreds of years to make bells and bowls, whether it be church bells, Asian gongs, singing bowls, Rind bowls. Most likely they are made out of what's called B20, 20% tin, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Now, there can be other elements in there depending on how refined the ore is. There will be trace elements. There can be nickel and iron and other metals in there. And in the past, perhaps they couldn't refine in, the metals as much, getting them out of the rocks, so there were more trace elements in it as opposed to today. But basically, it's a B20 bronze mixture. And when they tell you it's 7 metals or 10 metals or something, just, don't take that as being a truth. And I know people who have had bells analyzed and gongs and cymbals analyzed. It's easy to do that today, to analyze the metal content, and they generally come out to be B20 give or take a little in there. So, yeah, the 3 big things to watch out for are Tibetan bowls, no. Himalayan bowls, yes. Tibetan bowls, no. And ancient, probably not. And 7, 10, 12 metals, probably not. So those are my ideas. And that comes from reading reliable sources. Again, Frank Perry's book, listening and reading Mitch Nur's accounts of bowls and other sources. So it's a good selling point. You know, so much today is all about sales because this stuff is extremely popular now. So it's all about selling the instruments. So stories always sell things. So you have to be careful with that. Now, another really important thing is how these bowls are made. Singing bowls and Rind bowls are generally hammered out from a casting, and they're hammered and shaped. And there's plenty of YouTube videos showing people making singing bowls with hammers and fire and tongs, and they turn it and they hammer and they turn it and hammer it and all that. So they're shaped that way. That's a traditional way. Same thing, Rind bowls are generally fashioned that way, especially these bigger ones. But there's another way that is used, and today it's used even much more than it's been in the past. And that is taking a disc or sheet of metal, putting it in a lathe, and then using a tool. There's generally a form on the end of the lathe, so the metal is put there, and then using a tool to press the metal to fit the form. And then you take it off, and boom, you have a bell or a bowl. So a lot of these Rind bowls, the smaller ones, are pressed. And a lot of today's singing bowls are pressed. There's videos on YouTube with that. And I will link to a video of metal pressing showing someone making the bottom of, I believe, a lamp. And it's amazing how they do it. And it's so simple and easy. But if you think about it, if you hand hammer these bowls, you could only make so many bowls in a day, in a week, in a month. But if you press these bowls out, I mean, you can make a bowl literally in minutes. So the output goes way up. Thus, you have many more bowls to sell. So it's a thing to watch for. And even the pressed singing bowls, you know, they'll finish them with a hammer. So there will be hammer marks on them. And you look at it and go, oh yeah, that's hammered. Okay, good. But, you know, it may be pressed out. A couple things to look for. If you look at a singing bowl, especially on the edge, even like this one here, it'll be hard to see, even if I go up close, is this isn't flat. I mean, you could even set it this way on a table and shine a light and you would be able to see the light, you know, because it's not perfectly square here at the top. So I can see there's a dip here and there's a dip there, and that comes from being hammered out and being handmade. I think this one here has even more. Yeah, if I hold it this way, there's a big rise right here, and this side is much lower. And also, if you look at the roundness of a bowl, this one is not perfectly round. It's actually a little more indented here, and it's longer on this side. So by looking at things like that, the imperfections in a singing bowl will lead you to believe it's more handmade, hand-hammered. Plus, on this one, I can see hammer marks. I can see where it was hammered. And there's imperfections in the metal. There's like little pits and things. Those are certain types of things to look for to find if the bowl is pressed or actually handmade. Now, if I take one of these Rind bowls and look at it, I mean, the surface is perfectly flat all the way around. It's perfectly flat and even. I look at it, it's perfectly round. The sides are smooth, the bottom is smooth. They often have a series of rings on the bottom here. I mean, it looks very perfect. There's no hammering marks at all. I mean, it looks machine made. It's very perfect compared to the singing bowl here, which is imperfect. So those are some things to look for in buying your bowls. As always, as I said earlier, buyer beware. And, knowledge is power. The more you know, the more you're able to make better decisions when you're shopping. But as always, to me, it's up to the sound. I don't care if it's hand hammered or if it's machine made, as long as it has a sound that I can use for what I want it to do. So that, to me, is the most important criteria. With any instrument, how does it sound? It doesn't matter if it was made last week or 200 years ago, machine made or handmade or a combination. Does it have a sound I like and that I can use? That is always my number one criteria in buying things. Okay, so we'll look at my sets, but first I want to talk about how I play these. Now, generally with the larger ones, I'll use a medium yarn wound marimba mallet because it gets a fuller sound out of a bigger bowl. And I'll often just use a standard grip, like I've talked about in many of my videos. And that works fine, especially if a bowl is on the outside of a table or it's easily accessible. But more often than not, I will use a different grip. I've modified the traditional left-hand drummer's grip, the marching grip. It's generally played like this, where you put the stick in between the thumb and first finger and then have it resting on the third finger here, and you're playing like this, playing drums this way with the left hand. I've modified that grip a little bit to facilitate what I'm doing. I tend to hold it a little more in the fingers, more between the thumb and first finger at the end, or more at like the middle knuckle here, and then use the first finger or the second finger, or have it a little in between those in order to move it this way. But it's generally not arm motion or big wrist motion. It's more hand and finger motion. So on the outside bowls, I can do this as opposed to coming down like a drum stroke. It's more coming in. Or I can stroke outward like that. I like to use that grip. And then on the smaller bowls, especially here, they're all sort of crowded in. To try to get in between them and play them is really impossible. So I generally play them inside, but it's the same sort of stroke. Let's get a closer look at this. So here's my fingers. I have the middle joint and the thumb holding it there. That's my fulcrum. And then bring up the second finger and I kind of have it in between. So this is where it is, the movement. And I just move it like this. It's a very subtle movement. And again, you can see I'm not using any big wrist motion like this or big arm motion. It's all fingers. It's all subtle. And I don't need a big motion. I'll use a little more wrist on the outside bowls. Or if I'm in a hurry and I'm moving around, I might use some arm just because I'm reaching towards the bowl and I need to strike it. But generally, it's all fingers. Too many things on the floor here. So with these bowls, I generally play them just under the lip on the inside. Just kind of a quick flick. I mean, the front ones I could play on the outside. Or the back ones, if I have nothing here in the way, I could do a forward stroke. But I generally play on the inside of the bowl with a medium rubber mallet on these small Rind bowls and singing bowls. So let's look at my sets here. Like I said, I have the 3 larger bowls are sort of one melodic set. The 10 smaller bowls are another melodic set. So I have this sort of tuning. Which is a nice, pleasant sort of harmonious set there. Gives me some lower tones. Now, I don't generally use huge bowls. This is probably about a 10-inch bowl. I see a lot of people using really big bowls, and what I find is when you strike a really large bowl with a mallet, you get a very low tone, but there's generally no power. The tone will not carry. Those are great if you're doing personal work, like on a person, you're over a person, and you're striking the bowl. You're right next to them, or you're over their body, and you're striking it, sort of like this. That works fine because you're close. But from my experience with those very large bowls, the sound dissipates very quickly over the distance. It just does not carry those low tones. If I want those lower notes, I prefer to use other instruments, gongs or bell plates or something else to give me those tones. Again, because I'm playing percussively, my criteria is different. On many of those larger bowls, you can play them with a wand and get a really nice deep singing tone, but I generally don't do that. So I prefer smaller bowls. I have some larger ones. I have some different ones, but these are the ones I use in my working setup. And yeah, I find these sizes work really well. When I want lower tones, I use different instruments. So I have these 3. Then I have these 10 here, and they form a very rough scale, going down from 1 to 10. It's harmonious. It allows me to do melodic things. It's not a perfect scale. It's also not tuned to any specific notes. It's not tuned, you can't go to the piano and pick out all these notes because they're going to be in between and all over the place. But it works for what I do. And this set works with this set, and these all work with the copper-clad bells, the Burma bells, the bell plates, and the gongs that I use. So they all, again, are part of my gong orchestra here. So let's just go down the scale here. So we have a nice scale. It's, unique unto itself, but again, it works with all of my other instruments. And everything has been picked out by ear to fit together. These bowls have all been bought over a period of probably 20 years or so. And I keep adding to it when I find other pitches that work. If I find a bowl with a better pitch than one that I'm using, I'll swap it out. If it's a little more harmonious, I'll swap it out and use that instead. So it's ever evolving. One thing I did do is on the bottom, I have a label maker. I put numbers on these because I used to have to set them up and play them, and because some of them are almost the same size, like, okay, that's the high one. Okay, that goes here. So I did number all the bowls on the bottom, so it's just easy for me to pull them out and put them where they go. Okay, so let's listen to both sets together. And generally when I'm playing, I'll have a yarn wound marimba mallet in my left hand and a medium rubber mallet in my right hand. Sometimes I'll have two marimba mallets. It really depends on what I'm doing, but let's hear how they do fit together. So they work together as a complete set. The higher ones, the lower ones. Now, one thing I really like to do in my sessions, if you watch some of my recent videos talking about how I do things, and somebody's ringing here. It's always hard. There we go. I like to play little melodic ideas because I like melody, and I like to use melody in my sessions because for me it has a specific purpose of familiarity with the people. So if I play a melodic idea at the beginning and then throughout my session repeat it, it brings a sense of familiarity to the people who are there. So let's just give an example of something that I would do. So that's just a short example of the sort of thing I would do. Oftentimes I will also add other instruments, other bells and gongs into the mixture. One thing two ways I'll use the bowls is I'll play the bowl. I just let it fade out. Wait until the sound has really dissipated before I bring in another sound so that they're separated from each other. Then introduce the next one. We'll let that one fade out. So that's one way, is to let the sounds fade out, bring in the next one, and they're very separate sounds. Another way is to play them quicker, so then we get the sounds and overtones blending more. So now you can hear all these tones together. It's more like a chord. So these are different ways of working with the bowls in a percussive manner. Another thing would be to mute a bowl, perhaps mute it with a finger, or even use a mallet if I've got like a padded or yarn mallet. And as you could tell, there's two different ways I can mute it. I can mute it quickly or more gently, sort of fade it out. And this works with the larger bowls too. I often do that with many of my instruments because they ring out so long, and sometimes I do want a shorter tone. But that's one thing I like about these, is it gives me that option. I can have a longer tone, I can have a shorter tone. So that's basically bowls and how I use them. My own personal sort of artistic vision on bowls and mixing them with my whole setup. I much prefer them as percussive instruments, as resting bells, and it works for me. And you might look at this and go, well, that's okay, but I really like to play my bowls with a wand, and that is completely fine to do that. I do that here at home a lot. I do that for myself. I do that in various recording projects and that, but generally, like I said, when I am playing a session, if I want a singing bowl sound, I will use a drobu bell instead of a bowl, and that is just a personal preference. So as always, the important thing is to find what works for you. Explore these ideas if you are interested in them, and take what works for you and leave what doesn't. And if none of what I've talked about today works for you, that's completely fine, because we are all different and we all have our own artistic vision of how we want to create sound, how we want to create music. So to me, that's the most important thing. I put together all these videos to present my ideas and things that I have learned But again, it's always a matter of take what works for you. And if things don't work for you, then that's fine, because we are all very different. And I would hate if we all did the exact same thing, because it would be so boring. So explore your own path and keep exploring it and find your own ideas. Thanks a lot. If you really enjoyed this, hit the subscribe button down below, and you can even hit the little bell and you will get a notification when the next video comes out. I try to get them out every Wednesday or so, depending on my schedule. And we will see you next time. Thanks.